As humanity continues to rise up the tech tier, if I recall correctly on the Kardashev scale, there are three types of civilizations. The Type 1 civilization is the one that has planetary access. They're pretty much able to utilize all the energy available on their planet and then store for consumption. The Type 2 civilization can directly consume all of a star's energy, most likely through something like a Dyson sphere, while the Type 3 civilization is able to capture all the energy emitted by the galaxy and every object within, such as like stars and black holes. I mean, keep extrapolating that out, and a Type 4 civilization would probably just be able to build its own universe and then harness the energy in that for consumption to power their car or something. I know, what a weird throwback. Humanity is currently at a point in time that it's not really a Type 1, clearly. It is said that you're either a 0 or a 1, however, that is pretty binary of us, but when you break it down as concerning like our technology right now, you'll find something rather interesting. It is not a linear situation in the slightest, and the explosion of our advancements, building on the shoulders of giants in the last great breakthrough, means that given the last 300,000 years, the technology gained during the entire time frame by comparison is something that really we could just do in an afternoon now, and this puts us firmly at a 0.76, allegedly, on the tech civilization scale. Not exactly at 1, but the reality for very likely the 99.9999% repeating, of course, percentage of humanity's existence, we have been at 0.01. Only within the last 200 years have we actually begun to make any noticeable climb up that hill to claim our rightful place of owning the solar system and then spreading out from there. Hey, I'm Roanoke, and if you're new here, we are very pro-human on this channel, and Super Earth did nothing wrong. Anyhow, even with this high level of tech, I suppose you could say, the one thing that we are currently overdue for, allegedly, but we may actually be experiencing right now, is a medical revolution. While our capacities have increased concerning energy generation, structure building, and mobility, along with the exploration of space, the human body and its anatomy, while known for the last several thousands of years, even with ancient surgeries in our distant past, has been something of an enigma to us. I know that sounds like AI, as all get out, but notice, I did not say enigmatic. That is the tell. All AI says enigmatic for some reason. I actually just talk this way when I write, and something that I've noticed is whenever I meet other YouTubers who might watch this channel, they're like, oh, you actually just sound like that. It's true, I do. So simply put, seemingly the great barrier to entry concerning new medical tech has always been the technology itself. And not technology concerning what we would like to do, but technology that actually even allows us to build what we need in the first place. I mean, think of antibiotics. When you cut somebody open, you need antibiotics. The human body is an incredibly finely tuned machine. Actually, in some ways, the tuning appears to be so fine that we don't even really understand how this could come about naturally. Yes, there is a skull moving over the spine due to us looking over tall grasses and scanning for predators, which allowed us to get more intelligent. Which actually, you know what? I'm going off script. Let's talk about that because this is all leading up to the actual topic of this video, but it's important to understand the physiology of us associated with the neuronal connections that must be made within the mind's eye itself. Going back on script because, I decided to write about this, the line of thinking according to the theory of evolution is that our ancestors were arboreal at first, much like many other primates are. As the climate began to shift and dry out, this would in turn cause the vast jungles and forests, which we may have originated, although seemingly they appear to have been a discrepancy in the last few years because the skulls that we have found in caves further to the north, where they should have been, is fairly interesting and they are older. But this is why it is becoming more widely accepted humanity in its current form is 300,000 years old rather than 100,000 years, as it's been quite regularly said, at least also on this channel. And I've only been doing this for like 8 years. This is actually fairly new. Anyways, so the trees would die out and grasses grew, and we had to look out for predators in the area, hunting in the grass. Our ancestors would then stand up to peer over grasses and continue to walk. Over time, this became the more preferred method because those that could do this longer and more regularly would see more predators and have a better chance at survival. Those that would not would then be eaten. As enough time passed, and those that would do this more regularly would interbreed with those who were also doing it, which eventually would result in Australopithecus, who'd come about 2.5 million years ago, who was fully bipedal. This in turn would cause the skull to move more over the spine, which in turn would cause the connection points on the skull itself, like concerning the muscle, to not have to be as robust, which actually allowed for the skull to expand outwards, which specifically gave room for our parietal lobes to expand on the cerebrum and the frontal lobe to more fully develop. Now, it was around this time we also began scavenging for food, breaking into the calorie-dense bone marrow, and eating meat. And this would also fuel our brains to astronomical proportions. Now, again, you may be asking, yes, Roanoke, but what does this have to do with Mind's Eye? Well, I'm getting there. As our brains developed, this in turn would propel us to a bit of a strange position. Really, what is that exactly? Well, look, ego aside, and pro-humanism coming on strong as it always does, we are too smart for our environment, like way too smart. There was a time when we were sharpening spears and going toe-to-toe with literal monsters while dealing with the same hardware we have now. But the level of intelligence that has flourished within our species is otherworldly, almost literally. I'm still a bit confused as to how this environment led to us, but seemingly no other species has come before us and dominated the planet. Now, disclaimer, this could have happened, we just don't have any records of it, and even if they could have left records, maybe they did go extinct, and given the time frame that would need to pass, every structure that they may have created would have been long gone or underground where we haven't found it, which actually on my other channel, Roanoke Tales, I talk about the alleged Dark Pyramid in Alaska that's underground, which you could go there, go to the channel. I don't know if I would go check out the Dark Pyramid, but hey, you know what? I'm not a cop. You can go check it out. I don't care. You just might not come back. Anyways, so with this intellect, that brings us around to where we are in today's timeline. The point of this conversation is while our brains were growing, it's not like we were just knuckle dragging and slack jawing the whole time. Medical interventions, rudimentary technology, methods of transportation using animals, and cultivation of crops all sprung up out of this era as we continue to climb the tech scale. But currently, in game and in reality, Homo sapiens is very likely on the cusp of something huge concerning medical tech. And allegedly, if we can actually fire up a fusion reactor correctly and aren't just continuing to meme ourselves about how we're only a decade away like we've been doing since the 70s, we may actually have a chance at, energy generation that we could fuel this and then get to, I believe, where they are in Mindseye is 0.8 on the tech scale. But what exactly would this advancement look like? In our timeline, very likely this is going to take the form of gene editing first and foremost. Kurt Gazakt actually did a video on this that was very excellent, discussing the possibility of designer babies. However, from a medical standpoint of life-saving technology, the other side of that would be correcting gene errors, leading to a complete reversal of chronic illnesses, allowing for the person to live a normal and unimpeded life. That is ultimately the goal. However, there is a co-advancement that arguably needs to also take place with this, which is, gene editing can help, but this would far propel us to methods that could compensate or completely restore the functionality of the body. I am, of course, talking about cybernetic enhancements. Welcome to Mindseye! Man, what an intro. Glad you hung in there. Mindseye is a story-driven action-adventure thriller set in the fictional near-future city called Red Rock, where AI, robots, climate change, tech billionaires, and an ongoing clash between humanity, robotics, the state, and big corporate and private sectors are more real than ever, reflecting much of today's world because it's a nightmare out there, actually. The game has been in development for several years, and it's incredible to witness how many sci-fi concepts have now come to life, such as neural implants, mobile phone contact lenses, companion drones, and mainstream electric vehicles. You play as Jacob Diaz, a former elite soldier implanted with the Mindseye, a mysterious neural device that haunts him with fragmented memories of a covert mission that changed his life forever. Mindseye addresses this point, I think, in some ways that would be very likely. It's going to be how we move forward as a species. And the issue is humanity is warlike. We always have been. Have you seen the creatures that were on this rock with us before we had to lay the smackdown on them? 14-foot tall short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats, woolly rhinos, giant sloths, which doesn't sound bad, but they had claws that were like a foot long, and one swipe is trisecting you, basically. Fighting was survival, and it seems like no matter how advanced humanity gets, we just kind of can't seem to break old habits, at least not yet. In Mindseye, Jacob Diaz is equipped with something known as the Mindseye. I know, right? Crazy. Who would have guessed? But this piece of technology is very likely something that it's probably being worked on right now, IRL. And if you're paying attention to specific companies, some are saying they already have it here to a degree. Which, if our timeline holds up, this means Mindseye does not take place too far into the future, very likely in the late 2030s to mid-2040s. I will be an old man by then. Wait a minute. Well, not really that old, I guess. Well, no, I'll be pretty old. The question is, though, what is the Mindseye exactly and what is it doing? Well, once again, Jacob Diaz is being sent on a secret mission in the desert. He has been augmented quite heavily by today's standards, but given it another 200 years or so, and this will probably just be commonplace and regular standards by then, they will be laughing at us that we just use regular meat suits in order to survive. Engaging in this mission, something catastrophic takes place that would result in a lot of his team being taken out by a drone he was supposed to be controlling. The question, however, is why? Seemingly knocked unconscious, Diaz would then come back to later with fragmented memories or just with them outright missing. As clearly, like with any of us, he would be a bit curious as to what his past was, and the complete wipeout of his team, and very likely friends given he would have been in his unit for quite some time, he would embark on a personal mission, backtracking his implant to the actual company that would be associated with it, Silva Corporation. Welcome to Red Rock, baby! As your boy Seb here has set you up with a position in security working under Carrie Rigby, you walk through the near-future city set in a man-made oasis in the desert. It becomes quite apparent early on, however, as you get trained for your first day, that something is beginning to happen. Securing your arms and armor, you are immediately set out on your first cleanup detail. Some robots in the desert are having a party, appearing to have completely broken control from their robotic parameters. It's now becoming apparent even early on that even with the Mindseye allegedly deactivated within Jacob, he is able to move and react faster than Seb. Honing in visually due to the advancement of the lens in his eyes, he can actually keep track of enemies near him for a limited time frame, which, as you might guess, might be kind of a good thing to have. Having secured the outbreak of robots, which would be horribly disturbing, extrapolating that out, which I won't give spoilers, but let me tell you, it does become horribly disturbing based on the implications as to what's happening. But obviously, again, I can't tell you the ending. You need to go discover that for yourself. Diaz then shows something else is happening beyond just raw training being at his disposal. As you progress through, you begin to run into humanity's greatest op, other humans. At first, it's simply a situation of, oh look, this guy's from the trailer park, they aren't really all that trained. But then it progresses into the military itself intervening for reasons that, yeah, they probably actually do need to be there. As I progressed, I began to really think about what I was doing and how I was interacting with the enemies. What's interesting is, by Diaz's point of view, people appear to have no training, as he has remarked that several times, that basically they need to get basic training done in order to compete. However, I do not believe this to be the situation at all, and for that, we need to go back to what exactly the Mindseye is doing, because it goes beyond just his reaction time getting better. The Mindseye is a literal system built into what I believe to be the upper body, neck, and skull. Well, not just me, but the context clues of actual observations we can make about it are incredibly clear as to where it lies. However, I do not believe that it's entering the torso very deeply, nor the abdomen or the legs, given from what we can see. Instead, it is a cognitive enhancer rather than tapping into the body and making it stronger. Tapping into very specific nerves, its purpose is to increase reaction time, but also integrate into the brain so seamlessly that memories can either be applied or disrupted entirely. So I think the best place that we can start with this is the physical placement, as this will help to explain what is very likely connecting to it, or it's connecting to, which then will in turn will help us to understand how it integrates into Diaz's mind. Starting with the neck, we see most clearly just behind the ear of Diaz. This would place it within the temporal mastoid region, which is actually quite intelligent. It's almost like they planned this. See, this is where the concept typically that the best place maybe to enter is the foramen magnum. That is at the base of the skull where the brainstem will enter the skull and then connect to the rest of the brain. However, during the implantation process, this was actually accounted for. The spinal cord is incredibly delicate. The brainstem, while a little more robust than the rest of the brain concerning resistances to like oxygen deprivation, which actually is interesting because like let's say you're virtually brain dead and then you start agonal breathing, which is that gasping thing. That's pretty much what your brainstem is doing, trying to get you to breathe again because it's detecting that there is damage in the brain, but it hasn't succumbed yet. So it's basically like a last resort. If you start agonal breathing, you're already gone anyways, but it's just your brainstem attempting to kind of get oxygen again. But anyways, what happens if you do that? If you damage the actual brainstem trying to implant the Mindseye, heart rhythm can be entirely disrupted, breathing can stop, and essentially so many autonomic functions are housed within the brainstem that while this may seem like a great place to enter from concerning any wires that you may want to run, it's actually the worst possible thing you could do. Any wrong move, any wire piercing the brainstem, any extra pressure applied, and Jacob is flatlined, and now you have a nightmare on your hand concerning what you have to pay because this guy is done so. So what's a corporation to do that wants to dabble in human augmentation? If you said go through any other hole in the skull, like the auditory canal for instance, then you're absolutely correct. The internal auditory canal was chosen for very likely quite a few reasons. First, if there was a catastrophic issue, this would probably just only render Diaz deaf instead of dead. A lot easier to pay compensation for that. But along with this, the cranial nerves sit very close by, relatively speaking, in comparison to the foramen magnum. Along with there's a lot of along with these, but trust me, There's a lot of benefits to it, but following the ear canal deeper into the brain, you hit areas that are shown to be exactly the desired target for the mind's eye. As the mind's eye runs into this area from a whole perspective, it's important to remember that lines of it were run not only to the facial nerves, but very likely connecting to the trigeminal nerve, but also within the neck and arms as well. There are very likely several connection points in the arm concerning actual sensory nerves, which also innervate this to the motor neurons, but so like the radial, the ulnar, the median, the musculocutaneous, the axillary nerves, they're all tapped into by these lines. Now I can hear you asking, well, why is that, Roanoke? Well, because we are focusing on the limbs right now, the first idea we need to form is what is the mind's eye's purpose in terms of combat? Going back to Diaz telling people that they need to learn basic training, it's not that they didn't. It's just that Diaz is not operating within the typical human reaction time. To him, everyone appears slower, poorly trained, maybe dumb, ugly, stupid. No, they're not stupid. But the reality is it all comes down to the nervous system firing times versus actual wires. With the mind's eye connecting in the arms and the shoulders to the nerves, what would be happening is a response to the environment that would go well beyond anything humans could standardly react to. As incoming information hits the nerves, with the mind's eye's lines connected to these nerves, it would then receive the signal as well. Now, nerves in this area run at around 300 miles per hour in terms of communication back up to the brain. Typically, they will go to the spine. Let's say you grab something hot, that goes to the spinal arc, and then the spine is actually what makes the determination on if you should pull your hand away. However, an actual wire, even with your body taking the shortcut through the spine and then the spine making the choice, a wire runs at a speed which is the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. A little bit faster, as you might imagine, compared to 300 miles per hour. The impacts this has on response time would be absolutely insane, as the arms are going to typically be the response. You must also realize the mind's eye is built for fine-tuned responses rather than making Diaz run faster or hit harder like a Spartan or something. As a result, before the signal for pain, let's say, even hits the halfway point up the arm, the mind's eye has already formulated a response to the signal and sent it back to the arms in conjunction with the pathways that the brain wants to take. And this is the first thing the mind's eye accomplishes, putting Jacob so far beyond the capability of other non-augmented humans in terms of reaction time and processing ability that by comparison it would make people who are not even trained look like they're standing still, and highly trained soldiers with cyborg bodies look like they're amateurs, and then literal robots he's able to go toe-to-toe with. If this connection to the nervous system is where it is stopped, then it might be useful overall, but it goes well beyond that. Given the mind's eye implant runs much deeper, this signal clearly would need to be processed to make it actionable, and this is when things start getting pretty wild concerning the actual connections made within the brain itself. As the mind eye enters the auditory canal, it's clear to me that it would head directly towards the limbic system first, specifically the hippocampus. And there are many reasons for this actually, but one of the more interesting reasons is for it being able to learn beyond what humans are typically capable of. Now, you have to remember, learning is simply memory, and there are a few ways actually to do this. Some people are visual learners, watching by seeing and then doing. Some are auditory, they hear what they're supposed to do and then conceptualize it. I'm actually notoriously bad at this, reading directions or somebody telling me directions and then me trying to do it. Like build something, I have to build everything twice because I suck at it. Some people are kinetic learners. They engage in the actual process, screw up a bunch of times, but this is how they learn. The issue with all of these is, while you may learn, with kinetic being apparently the best way, as you are actually engaging in that action, they may not give you a complete breakdown of the actual scope of what is required. The mind's eye bridges this gap completely. Now, before we talk about this, this would be a massive dub for humanity. Imagine, if you will, using this piece of tech to not only enhance reaction time and process faster, but new experiences and skills can be beamed directly into your head. Now you may be asking, well, how? Well, again, the mind's eye connection to the limbic system, we must first start with likely its foundational connection, again, being the hippocampus. The hippocampus of the brain is fairly important, as you might say it is tasked with memory encoding and retrieval. Basically, when memory is formed, it is responsible for that formation. When you need to call it up again and perform a task, it is activating, which then allows you to be skilled at anything that you do concerning that specific task. The mind's eye is connected into this area and isn't just shocking the brain, but very likely has integrated itself into the actual neurological network with continuous communication with its processor and the brain of Jacob Diaz. And this is why it's also able to disrupt memory recall, which it does fairly regularly. Along with this, it's also highly likely that it is tapped into the amygdala and cingulate cortex. The amygdala having information as far as emotions tied to memory, and the cingulate cortex allowing attention to be applied and emotional regulation. We see this during times of extreme stress. The mind's eye will actually respond to emotional spikes in Diaz's face, forming those lines. This is showing activation of these areas at an increased level, which there's a bleed over into the mind's eye. Now, memory is good, but foundationally, if that's all it is, it's just a memory. And the issue with memory is if you never really feel like you experienced it, then it's not going to latch on as strongly. And that's what makes this entire process so fascinating. Well, concerning the implant, however, the mind's eye isn't there to just make you remember or encode skills, but the skills are encoded by the actual brain thinking it did the thing which encoded it in the first place. I guess you could say the download process is literally your brain thinking it's in that situation, and this would require a few things. The mind's eye must run to a couple of separate areas of the brain. The occipital lobe would be the first requirement, and this is the visual processing area of the brain. Now, also to couple with this, before we get into that, the optic nerve, which obviously runs from the eyes to the occipital lobe, is fairly fast, but it's pretty clear to me the mind's eye would connect to the optic nerve, probably very, very close to the eyes, and then run to the visual processing center, because then that signal would go into the mind's eye as well, and then it could make a decision based on what it's seeing, which is why everybody also likely appears slower to Diaz and I guess less trained, because he's processing things faster. But anyways, here's where we see, remember the hallucinations? I showed up on screen. You don't remember it unless you've played it, but the hallucinations in the room, that was with us because it was supposed to be. When entering the office, Diaz sees that there is a bubble in space that appears. Clearly, it isn't really there to somebody who doesn't have a mind's eye. However, what mind's eye is actually doing is attempting to integrate combat experience. Now, this is being inspired elsewhere, and you should play it to figure out where. But as you go through this experience, what is essentially happening is a prolonged period of unconsciousness as your visual cortex, specifically the primary visual cortex and visual association centers, are activated. And this would basically make the brain see this event. Because remember, the brain is simply interpreting the information around you through stimulus. If the brain is force-fired to process information coming in from the mind's eye, then there's virtually no difference according to your brain. And it would be the same thing as it happening versus being implied that it happened. But it's not just new experiences designed by the mind's eye, it's also others. Later, you see what it's like to be a back niner through the eyes of someone else, very likely tapping into the lens that they were wearing at that time. You are then essentially them for an extended period of time, learning how to fight and new skills, which makes you more adept at dealing with those tactics that they in turn might use on you later on. Of course, again, the spinal cord itself is not the target of the mind's eye by design. However, much like when you are sleeping and entering REM, the brainstem is clearly primed in a way that releases GABA and glycine on the motor neurons, causing you to remain paralyzed while you are in this download process, so you do not act out those combat scenarios. Other areas of the brain are going to need to be involved in this process as well, given emotion comes into play, helping to encode memories more firmly. As you are experiencing what is essentially a prolonged combat visual hallucination, the temporal lobe would also be activated to add realism to the event and allow you to hear combat, which in turn, the amygdala would be involved, providing the aforementioned emotion. And this is also why, as Diaz engages in combat scenarios, he begins to remember more and more about what the mind's eye was trying to prevent him from remembering as the game progresses. And also, he hears things towards the end that nobody else can hear, which is activation of the temporal lobe. But one area would also receive actual autonomy during this event in order to allow for the training to actually work. The frontal lobe basically houses you, and this is where you make your decisions, logic things out, and react. The brain is simply providing the training ground for you, but the frontal lobe is still responding to the actual events. And this is probably more important than you may initially realize. If the mind's eye just gave you the memory, but you were completely removed from the choices and decisions within the hallucination, you would very likely not actually learn anything in the process. But when you actually can interact, and you learn to go right instead of left, when to take cover and when to fight. Not only does this give you a chance to practice in this environment that is completely 100%, free of danger and its life, but it also gives you your frontal lobe a chance to internally compensate and change its own firings of neurons to help you anticipate enemy movement and reduce hesitation when making those decisions. The actual process must involve free will to actually shape the frontal lobe while the rest of the brain builds in this environment and also subsequently builds the environment in response to the mind's eye prodding. Now, with the neurological parameters covered, you may be asking, well, Roanoke, why not route this through the rest of the body? And for that, it's important to remember that this is the near future, not the far-flung future. The issue with routing it through the whole body is not just cost, obviously, and unknowns, but it can also very likely cause the person to incur damage. By the mind's eye routing to the nerves of the arms and brain, it can communicate faster than the brain can, making the responses of Diaz engage in feel almost instinctual to him, as the brain is informed by the mind's eye, but the mind's eye very likely takes over some of the more quicker response times protecting Diaz. However, this would be more fine-tuned muscular responses. It being fine-tuned means that it's not a strength thing, but a delicate operation, and this would not put the tendons, ligaments, bones, and muscles at risk for damage. Think of it sort of like, this is the best way to put it, when Spartans were first being created and their brains controlled the Mjolnir prototypes, soldiers actually ended up dying as the suit's responsiveness to their cybernetic enhancements would react too quickly and damage their bodies, breaking their spines, causing a convulsive movement, continuing to break their bones, and eventually just taking them out. Ouchies. Mind's Eye is essentially a cybernetic enhancement, however, it's not using a suit, but instead using the more finer muscles. It does not control the trunk muscles or the legs, and instead, those are still operated by the brain. However, the brain itself is better trained by the Mind's Eye, so that the movements become deliberate and well-informed, so to speak, which then allows Jacob to make better decisions on when to move and how to do it all, because he's falling back on training that happened internally in his head at the behest of the Mind's Eye. Of course, the question will still remain for you to figure out what caused the Mind's Eye to freak out early on during the special ops mission, why can he read the symbols that don't appear to be linked to any form of human language, and who is talking to him that nobody else can hear? Well, that is all yours to discover. Check out Mind's Eye now, available on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Mind's Eye will be 50% off on Steam and the Epic Games Store from February 2nd to 15th. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. Huge shout out to Build a Rocket Boy for sponsoring this episode covering their new game Mind's Eye. If you did enjoy, then please leave a like and a comment as a help get the video out there. Otherwise, you're a huge dork. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Instagram, Roanoke Tales link, and Patreon in the description if you'd like to support the channel. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the Astronaut tier, we have Kusith and Whoopsie Genji. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Astrophysicist tier, we have Death Dancer, Mayura, and Webtron Supreme. Thank you guys as well. At the Scientist tier, we have Frank Shack Frank, Some Big Nerd, Metric System, Invictus Echo, Official Text, and the Homeless Guy on the Street, and Gina Elaine. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support. You're absolute ballers, so thank you. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. See y'all in the next one.